How long did you stay at Columbia?
I must have been there from 61 to 69, 70. And then Wesleyan invited me up here to talk about this strike. And then called off the meeting because the person I was supposed to debate chickened out. But they offered me a job, and I ended up here, for better or for worse.
Now, you mentioned Victor Serge, and when did you first learn about Victor Serge?
I learned about Victor Serge when I was a student at Yale College, but not in any classroom, although I was a French major. We had a socialist club there called the George Orwell Forum, and with a couple of faculty members, and we were connected up with the Socialist Party in New York City. And among the books on the reading list was George Orwell's Homage to Catalonia, where he talks about his experience in the Spanish Revolution in '36, and one of Serge's books. And so it was through the socialist movement that I heard about Victor Serge.
So tell us about Victor Serge.
Victor Serge is an amazing character because he was a kind of a revolutionary zealot in that he was present on the scene and a witness to many of the most important revolutionary events in the first half of the 20th century. And he was a very idealistic man who, as a result of his opposition to every kind of regime, spent about 12 of his 57 years in various prisons in Spain, in France, and in Russia, where when the revolution turned sour and he raised his head in opposition, he was arrested and sent to the notorious Lubyanka prison and interrogated, but he refused to confess anything, and they finally sent him out into the wilderness in exile on the border of Asia, but he survived that, and by dint of the fact that he was very well known as a writer in Europe, and as a writer who defended the Russian Revolution and depicted it in novels and history books and so on, a little bit like John Reed, for those of you who can remember 10 Days That Shook the World and remember the movie Reds. All right, well, he was for France a little bit what Reed was for the United States. And when they imprisoned him, there were protests among teachers' unions and among writers. And Stalin, in an almost unique gesture, allowed him to leave Russia just before the blood purges, when Stalin began exterminating all the old revolutionaries that had made the revolution.
So he had second thoughts about the revolution? Very deep second thoughts.
Very deep second thoughts, yes. First of all, he had been an anarchist or anarcho-syndicalist before the Russian Revolution. He was nearly 30 when he got to Russia because he had been born of exiled Russian revolutionaries. So he was a red diaper baby, if you will. I'm a third generation red diaper baby. My grandfather, who was a tailor in Hartford and Springfield, was a member of Victor Debs's Socialist Party here before World War I. But to return to Serge, he joined the Russian Revolution realizing that there were problems, that the Bolshevik Party was much more authoritarian than he believed in, but he thought the only way was to join it and work from within. And that's what he did, until they finally, 10 years later, expelled him from the party and arrested him.
Now, was he also in Spain?
He was in Spain during 1917, when there was an uprising that did not develop into a revolution, and 20 years, and he wrote about that most prophetically, because in his novel about that, called Birth of Our Power, he says in 10 years, in 20 years, the same comrades will be walking down the same street, but this time we will have taken the city because their insurrection failed. And it was almost to the date that in 1936, the working people took over the city of Barcelona, made public transport free, and as Orwell said when he arrived there from England as a volunteer, the working class was in the saddle.
And where did Serge end up his last decades?
he ended up his last 7 years in Mexico. He was when he was allowed to leave Russia in '36. He went first to Brussels and then to France, where tragically no one on the left was prepared to listen to the truth about Russia, to the truth that Stalin was exterminating the old revolutionaries and manipulating the communist parties in the West for the benefit of Russian foreign policy and nothing else. For example, in Spain, where the communists allied with the liberals to wipe out the collectives that the peasants had made and the factories that the workers had taken over, and eventually to assassinate people like Andres Nin, the old revolutionaries, the sincere ones, whom Serge had known 20 years earlier and had known as friends of Russia.
Now, you've gone to Russia and talked about Serge?
Yes. As soon as it was possible to travel freely in Russia, my daughter Jenny, who grew up here, and I went and made contact with informal organizations, in other words, non-government, non-party groups. And as a result of that, and also of my desire to see if I could recover 2 books that Serge wrote while he was in captivity that were confiscated when he left Russia. And that got me involved with a lot of Russians, and we ended up creating a Victor Serge library in Moscow, which is the only place where Russians have access to Western books on feminism, labor struggles, anti-imperial.
And this is during the Soviet Union?
Well, this started in 1990. Yes, during Gorbachev, and the library opened in 1997. And it's still going, although under the present climate, we're like it's backsliding. The government of Putin, who is a head of the secret police, is backsliding to the days of Stalin, and at the same time they have mafia capitalism there, so that the exploitation, they've ripped up the social safety net and so on. People there are making lots and lots of money, a few, and everybody else is very, very poor. And the latest was an attack on one of our comrades, Stanislav Markelov, who was a human rights lawyer and was involved in the case of the journalist who was murdered last year and a half ago. And he was murdered this January in broad daylight on a street in Moscow. So I've got a picture of him in my book, which we could close up if I can find it quickly enough.
Well, I don't think we could do a close-up. Maybe you could send it to me.
Here we go. That's Stanislas. I met him in Petersburg at the first social forum in Russia.
So he was murdered in 2008.
No, 3 months ago. This winter, along with a young journalist.
When was the last time you were in Russia?
I was in Russia last July, and I'll be back this July, because our organization called Praxis, which you can contact at praxiscenter.ru, www.praxiscenter.ru. Praxis publishes in Russian the books of Victor Serge and my own books. In fact, this book is published by Praxis in Moscow and in New York.
Is there any growth of radical opposition to Putin's socialist or anarchist that you can see?
Yes, in Russia, there's a whole pretty much underground network of socialists and anarchists and social democrats and libertarians and so on. And we meet every July, which is when I go there, and we have discussions and do research and exchange papers and also schemes to organize to the extent that it's possible in a country that's increasingly totalitarian. And of course, we work with Memorial, the Memorial Society, which is the group that has researched all the horrors of Stalinism and brought them to light and brought